Father Chairman, my Lord Bishops, Reverend Father, National President, National Councillors, Knights of Merit, State Chairman, ladies and brothers. It is my pleasant duty here this afternoon to introduce you to Father George Pell. He is a priest of the Ballarat Diocese. He had his early days in Ballarat, where his parents operated in a hotel. He attended St Pat's College. Since then, he has been formerly a director of Aquinas College, Ballarat. He is now rector of the Corpus Christi College at Clayton. He has degrees from Oxford University, from the Propaganda Fide University in Rome, and Monash University. He is a very qualified man. We've had a few things thrown at us this afternoon. We don't know what lines he's going to follow. Without any further ado, I'll welcome Father George Pell for his...
Mr. Chairman, my lords, my brother knights, I've been asked to speak on education towards the year 2000, and I intend to do that, although I will digress briefly onto one or two of the topics which have been raised. I noticed that your first object was that you were to work for the advancement of Australia. And tonight, or this afternoon, while I'm talking about education towards the year 2000, I want to situate it in the area of the Catholic contribution towards educating people, our young people, for their future. We Catholics have made a profound contribution to the whole, not only the development of Australia, but the whole development of the concept of Australian patriotism. It was Archbishop Polding in Sydney who was the first man, at the time when Australia was made up of different colonies, he was the first man to speak of Australia for the Australians. It was Archbishop Mannix during the First World War who got himself into a lot of hot water because he said that in that particular struggle, the thing that was of first importance to Australians was Australia. As a Catholic community, we can't afford simply to be interested in ourselves. We're nearly 30% of the population, and what we do will influence the way our young people grow up, but it will also have a profound influence, or it can have a profound influence on Australian life. I'm going to talk about a number of characteristics of Australian society as I think it might be about the year 2000, which is only 14 or so years old. It's getting uncomfortably closer. And the first thing that I hope will continue will be that the strong bond between the priests and the clergy, the priests and the laity, which has enabled the Catholic community in this country to do so much, I hope that those close bonds will be retained. Earlier today, a few people wondered about the young clergy. Well, they're a bit worried about this or about that. Now, the Catholic Church, Catholic means universal. And that means that we, like Australian society, have different approaches to different things on many, many topics. And that universalism is to some extent reflected in the clergy. But I can tell you that speaking about the students who are at Corpus Christi now, I'm absolutely certain that the overwhelming majority of you have got nothing to fear from them and got no reason to be worried about them. or two of them might be charismatics, Jesus jumpers perhaps. One or two of them might be a little bit more left-wing than myself. Quite a few of them won't wear Roman collars the way I do. But all of those three things are matters of style. And they've got as much right to their approach, to be charismatic or a bit more left-wing or not to wear a Roman collar. They've got as much right to do those things as I have. And what I ask you to do, somebody mentioned that when the new priests come out, they're inexperienced in their work. We all are when we start our jobs. What I ask you to do is to support them. If you don't like their style, or if they're being a bit silly and you go to their throat, then probably it's not going to help dialogue next time, and it's probably going to reduce your capacity to influence them and support them. But if you go along and you make it quite clear that you are supporting them, but you can't understand this or you can't understand that, you've got much more chance of working together. 3 priests came out from Corpus Christi into this diocese this year, into the Sandhurst Diocesan. One of them I think is in this parish, and I'm delighted to say that I have a small hand in their preparation. They're good quality priests, and the priests who are coming out now are up to the mark and are up to the job, whatever the slight differences of style. I ask you to believe that, and I ask you to act on it. One of the big things about vocations, of course, is that youngsters pick up not so much our official rhetoric, but the comments that slip out, our inner attitudes. And if in fact, regularly in the homes, people are worrying about the young clergy or complaining about the young clergy or some of the old clergy, then of course these vibes will be picked up by the young people, and they will, the two things will run together with the very, very strong anti-religious currents that are in our society. I put that before you. I'm not sure that it particularly answers the points that are raised, but I do think what is of paramount importance is that we pull together. The forces that are arrayed against us are infinitely more significant than the differences of style that there might be amongst a few of us. That's the first one. Moving on outside religious things, to give a little bit of background for my educational comments, and starting with the country. At the moment we have 7% of the workforce producing all the food in Australia. And that 7% is diminishing, as you know, and that is probably only about 1/10 the number of people who were producing food for a much smaller population at the start of this century. It's quite unprecedented in the history of any sort of society that such a small percentage of people are feeding such a large body of people. I think too, unfortunately, the sort of reduction in the workforce that we've seen in the farming area, we are now starting to see that in the manufacturing area. And that will have, that is having significant consequences. Secondly, if we look at the world, say, of computers, the microchip industry, there's been an increase of productivity, of capacity, of something like the order of 10,000 in the last 30 or 40 years. If that improved capacity was applied to the world of Rolls Royces, we'd now be able to get a Rolls Royce for a few dollars. The first computer was built in the 50s. It took loads of electricity. It covered an immense amount of space. It continually broke down. All the things that were done by that first computer in the 50s can now be done by a small mobile computer costing much less than $1,000 that are present in many of our schools. This is, of course, going to replace jobs in one particular area. It's a question not simply of automation, but also too of robotisation. I don't know how many robots work in Australian factories at the moment, but that's certainly of the order of tens or hundreds, and that will increase. Thirdly, while Australia's population will increase slowly, there will be a significant change in the balance of the age groups, and a vast increase in the number of older people. Many of us will be pensioners, and we will require the government to maintain us in the style to which we've become accustomed. And this will put very considerable financial strain on the actual productive or working members in our society. Migration will continue. It might even increase significantly to compensate for our low birth rate and perhaps to try to stimulate economic growth. And a lot of that will continue to come from non-European countries, certainly from Asia and perhaps from South America too. Next, I think it's possible that economic growth will be based in the new states, the Sun states, Western Australia, Queensland, perhaps Northern Territory. And we're likely to see the southeast corner of Australia being static economically, or perhaps even slipping a little bit. And perhaps too, with provincial cities such as Ballarat and Geelong, possibly and Bendigo, perhaps particularly vulnerable to the changes that are about to come. Next, fifth or sixth, the Australian government, I think, will be under increasing pressure from the purchasers of our minerals and our primary products to reduce the tariff barriers around our manufacturing industry, which are limited by small markets, probably antiquated technology, and probably in some sense limited management, and of course union profits. I think the direction, unless important and significant action is taken, is towards increasing pressure on the number of people who are going to be employed. Now, it was these sorts of pressures that prompted a few years ago a man like Sir Roderick Carnegie to talk about Australia becoming the poor white trash of Southeast Asia. Another academic put it a bit more politely, and he said, we're racing rapidly towards being underskilled, untrained, and less undereducated for the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow. I hope that the Catholic schools in particular will play a vital and important role in disproving those sort of gloomy predictions that I've put out, or creatively working against these pressures. I hope that we'll never have I hope we never have any sorts of comfortable workaholic Catholic school teachers secure in their jobs saying that we're really interested in training the young people for creative leisure. I hope that our schools will continue to turn out people well trained in the basics of numeracy and literacy, and I'll be coming back to this again and again. Where we'll be able to ascertain just how well we're going. All sorts of tests are available for this, to see what grades of achievement that we've got. And that our schools will continue to turn out people with sound work habits, strong discipline, so that they can if they can get into the workforce, they'll be able to hold a job. It will be a complicated technological society in the future. Running with this, we certainly will have to try to help people to cope with the significantly increased leisure time. Apart perhaps from the farmers, and the priests, and a few professionals, and the mums at home, most other people, I suppose there are a lot of other people, are going to have a reduced working week. What I think I'm arguing for, not just in our academic schools, but also in the equivalent of our technical schools, is for the development of the power to think, the development of hard mathematical and literary sort of capacities. Because if people haven't got that capacity to change and absorb and learn new things, it's very like that the particular skills that they're taught, that they will change 2 or 3 times during their lifetime. Even in an area like carpentry. the technical possibility of so much of what is now being done by carpenters, being done through automation and through robots, is remarkable. They say that in California, which somebody has spoken of the Californication of Australia, we often sort of follow in American patterns, but there they're talking about the white middle-class man changing his car, his job and his wife, every 5 or 10 years. And there's a tiny little bit of truth, unfortunately, in all those sorts of prognostications. Let me look at the way some of the leading industrial powers educate their young people, and let me compare that with Australian figures. In Victoria at the moment, about 45%, perhaps a little less, go through to year 12. Probably about 80% go through to year 11. And those percentages have risen significantly in the last few years. For a long time ago, only about 35% of our young people went through to year 12. In Japan, 92% of youngsters, boys and girls, men and women, have 12 years of education, primary and secondary. In West Germany, we've got a big industrial system. I think about 70% of all school leavers go into some form of either joint form of studying and apprenticeship. The number of Australian apprentices, it's difficult to discover what it is, but it's probably closer to 5 or 10% rather than 70%. At the tertiary level, our participation rates are not significantly better. We look backwards. So many of us look back and say the educational opportunities are so much greater today than they were in the time of our parents or grandparents. And that is a useful and consoling comparison. The really important point is, will our educational achievements and standards be sufficient for the immediate future and for the long-term future? There's only about 8% of our people now go on to some form of tertiary education. What is interesting is the colossal differences in participation rates between different parts of Australia. In Andrew Peacock's Kooyong electorate, there are 10 times as many people going on to tertiary education in some form as there are up in the Mallee in the northwest of the Ballarat Diocese. Now, I'm not a bit anti-Kooyong. We'd probably all be pretty comfortable living there. I'm not opposed to the participation rates that that particular part of Melbourne enjoys. What I'm saying is that there must be a great pool of skills and abilities that remain untapped in some of the poorer areas of Melbourne and certainly in some of the country areas. Now, I've got no doubt that our participation rate will improve at secondary and at tertiary level. Not because many Australians will have a vastly increased belief in the power of education, but because it will help to lessen the number of people wanting jobs, and secondly, we'll be forced by market forces to train our people for participation in the society of the future. And this has got to happen in our country areas. I don't know this part of the country. I do know in the country where I came from that traditionally the families have been much more prepared to educate their daughters than their sons, especially if they had them on farms. All the daughters would go right through the university or teachers' college or something like that, to get the fellas out and get them back. I think that's a colossal mistake for a number of reasons. First of all, even talking in terms of farms, because of the life is going to become more complicated at the farm level too. All sorts of gadgetry will be available that can help. Secondly, farms are continuing to get bigger and many, many young people have got to go away from home to get jobs. And thirdly, I think that the capacity for leadership in our national community and in our Catholic community from the country areas is very, very large. We can only grasp those opportunities for leadership, or will be much better placed to grasp those opportunities for leadership if our young people are at least as well educated as others in the society. I think that the real tensions in the future are not likely to be between workers and bosses, not even between country and city, although we've heard a bit about that today. I think the really important tension in the future is going to be between the unemployed and those who are in some gainful sort of employment. The lifelong unemployed. The people who don't have the skills or the attitudes, the personal capacity to hold a job in this complicated society that's evolving. The sort of resentment that could be built up there, especially if that number increases very significantly, we could have all sorts of trouble. Society will be increasingly multicultural, at least in colour and background, even if the Australian style remains very, very similar. In Clayton, in the parish where I now live, at the Catholic school, there are 61 nationalities. You go a little bit further to Spring Vale, where a lot of the migrants come and they move out there first before going in different areas. There are 67 nationalities in the Catholic school. Only 5 or 10% of the kids in these schools are old Australians, and the majority call them Skips, after Skippy the kangaroo. That's radically different from many parts of the country. I think the improvements in audio visuals, the improvements through computer link-ups and these sorts of things, I think these, especially in country and isolated areas, can bring immense benefits to education, immense benefits. It was interesting, somebody was talking about vocation awareness and getting out a book or a magazine. I'm sure that's a good thing. But as editors of Catholic papers and editors of the Herald know, an increasing number of people are not reading papers. And perhaps that trend is strongest amongst youngsters. And so as well as looking, not as a substitute, but as well as looking at papers, I think in talking about vocations and promoting the whole Catholic deal, the Catholic way of life, we should also certainly be looking at films and certainly at videos. Catholic schools are often a hard market for somebody to talk about religion. And I know, having tried to do a little bit over the years myself, that sometimes your efforts can go awry and you fear that things might be a little bit worse when you're finished than when you start. But if you get a good package together on a video or in a film that really is appropriate and geared towards people who do have different sensibilities from ours, then in fact we really might be making some positive contribution. What I think I want to do now, just to conclude, is to talk about the Catholic community and the importance perhaps of ideas within the Catholic community, and then of the importance of a continuing religious dimension within our schools, not just for our children, but as a contribution to the wider Australian society. I'm not a bit anti-ecumenical. I'm that we should have increasing cooperation with the other churches. But I'm under no illusions about the central role that the Catholic community plays in this country as an agent for influence in the society. If our effort crumbles, the Christian way of looking at things is basically finished in Australia. If we can't enlist a big number of our young people to share our basic convictions, even though they might have a different style from ourselves, then the Christian way of doing things in Australia will slowly be taken down the gurgler. And it's here that ideas are important. See, the youngsters today are spending more time, the average Australian youngster is spending more time in front of a television set than he is at primary school. If half the people who appeared on television fronted up at our front door, we wouldn't let them in. And yet 99.9% of us are more than happy to have them continually in our lounge rooms. And our children, it's no wonder that in some ways their instincts are different from ours. In the Ballarat Diocese there was a survey of religious attitudes, and the difference between older and younger attitudes almost exactly paralleled the introduction of television. Those who grew up without television had a significantly different attitude to lots of things religious, from those people who grew up with television. We're no longer isolated in any sense at all. We can't imagine that we are, and that means that all of us, priests, parents, teachers, have got to get down on the shop floor, on the family floor, and talk about what we believe in and try to sell it. It won't get into the hearts of our children by osmosis or automatically, or by all the splendid sermons that you get for 7.5 minutes a week in the church. The whole burden of effort and responsibility in public life is shifting away from the shoulders of the clergy onto the shoulders of the laity. Our numbers are reducing, but also our capacity for influence has been reduced. The Catholic Church will survive and prosper in this country to the extent that the Catholic lay people, men and women, can take up the burden, and we can pass on the things that we regard as important. I think too we must reinforce the alliance between our teachers and our priests and our parents. If you've got parents saying the priests are not up to much and the teachers are cranky, you've got people going in different directions. If it goes the other way, you've got teachers who are saying parents are old-fashioned, the priests don't know what they're talking about. I'm not saying that is happening. It is by and large. But often we don't seem to be sufficiently aware of the importance of working together, pulling together, supporting the influence of one another. If in fact we're squabbling one with the other, one group with another, one point of view with another, it's more than likely that the only thing the young people will take out of that is neither side knows what they're talking about. But we're destroying one another's credibility and our capacity for influence. And the great religious challenge in the education world will be to keep our Catholic schools Catholic. First of all, we have the danger of government control. I'm talking about long-term danger. I don't think that will be by legislation. I don't think that might come through cutting off the money. I don't think it will come through falling enrolments. An increasing number of non-Catholic people are wanting to send their children to our schools precisely if they realise, sometimes better than we do, just what we've got. The pressure will come through, not through legislation, but possibly through regulation. And I think our line there has got to be maximum cooperation with all other agencies in education, but no giving of ground whatsoever on the question that we control our own destiny. We employ our own teachers. Within the framework of the state, we decide what we do in curriculum, what we teach. We decide who comes into our schools. On these, especially these 3 points, I think there's no ground for compromise whatsoever. The other danger is that our schools will be religious fronts. Not hypocritical fronts, but that it will be religion will be one of the things we do on special occasions, like, in public life, catching, matching and dispatching. Lovely to have a wedding in the church, isn't it? Couldn't dream, Father, of getting married in the gardens. Terrible. But I mean, it mightn't get along to church much very often either. There's a whole pattern in Western society of what were religious institutions becoming religious in name, basically secular in nature. I know of one non-Catholic secondary school, a good school, which has a combined department of religion and physical education. And I've got no doubt that most of the kids would regard phys ed and most of the parents as being much more important than all that nonsense. Sir John Monash's parents earlier this century were Jews as he was, and they wanted the best education for their son. They chose one prominent non-Catholic public school in Melbourne because they were quite certain of two things. that there he would get a splendid education and certainly no effective Christian influence. Now, we don't want that sort of thing to be happening in any way in our Catholic schools at all. Our schools, our secondary schools, are now religious battlegrounds. Some of them, many of them, in the way we used to think of the workplace or tertiary education previously. They reflect the decline in religious practice among parents. They reflect the increase in the number of broken marriages, and therefore you've got increased the number of wounded kids. We're not quite certain of whether they're coming and going. In a lot of Catholic schools there is strong peer pressure against religion. So if you want to put forward a religious topic, I'm probably talking more about the city now than the country. Possibly, don't know. If you want to talk about a specifically religious topic as distinct from talking about sexuality or peace or world problems, you've got to really go to battle for it, and there'll be a percentage of kids who will be quite hostile. What I think we've got to do is to present the Catholic message fully, without compromise, without apology, but not in a way that is old-fashioned in tone, not without using all the modern advantages of methodology and curriculum development and learning theory that are available to us. And of course, our schools need strong supporting communities, parents and friends that work with the teachers and the pupils. Don't knock your schools any more than you would knock the clergy, although I'm sure that the performance in our schools is probably as imperfect as the performance of your clergy. But you look at our history, I'm sure in Australian history there have been many more fights and disagreements in the past between lay people and clergy than are happening today. I've got no doubt at all about that. What we need, as I said, to do is to pull together. And we need to support and encourage and remind our Catholic schools of what they should be doing. In Melbourne, in the Archdiocese in the last 2 years, I'd say something between 2/3 and 3/4 of the vocations that have come into Corpus Christi College have not been from Catholic, have not had any secondary Catholic school education. I reckon that's saying something, and certainly something that must be discussed amongst parents and principals and school teachers. Now, they came from good families of vocations, they came from good families and good parishes. But if we can have good families and good parishes producing vocations, and they're at high schools or occasionally at an ecumenical school, why can't we get good kids, good families and good parishes who are to come out of our Catholic secondary school? I think it's something that we definitely must have a good look at. You might say this is a slightly pessimistic talk. Despite my name, I belong to the Irish-Australian tradition, where if things are going well, we confidently expect a turn for the worse. I don't, in fact, reckon that we're going badly. I don't see any reason at all why we can't improve. What I do object to is saying we're going marvellous and everything's all right and not addressing the situation as it is. We've got great capacity for growth. We've got the message of Christ himself. Your group has got a great capacity to influence and to lead, and I, for one, wish you every blessing and every success and every bit of support I can in that work of influencing Australia.